My phone rang at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing landscaping proposals. The voice on the other end was frantic, professional, and completely foreign to me. "Hi, this is Sarah from Coastal Catering. I need to confirm the final headcount for your event next Saturday. The invitations mentioned 140 guests, but we want to verify the exact number for the beach house setup." I stared at my coffee mug, completely bewildered. "I think you have the wrong number," I said slowly. "No, sir. I have Calhoun listed as the host. Your family sent us your contact information from the wedding invitations." I hung up the phone and sat there for a full minute, trying to process what I had just heard. Wedding invitations, my beach house, 140 guests. None of it made any sense. I grabbed my keys and headed straight to my parents' house in suburban Denver, my mind racing with possibilities. None of them good. The 20-minute drive felt like hours. I had worked my tail off for 5 years to buy that beach house in Malibu. After dropping out of college to start my landscaping business, I had saved every single penny, lived in a studio apartment, and ate ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I care to remember. That beach house represented everything I had achieved through blood, sweat, and determination. It was my sanctuary, my investment, and my proof that I could make something of myself without a college degree. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I noticed my sister Emma's car was already there. The sight of it made my stomach churn with a growing sense of dread. I walked through the front door without knocking, something I had done since childhood, and found my mother Linda in the kitchen, humming while she prepared what looked like wedding planning materials spread across the dining table. "Mom, I just got the strangest phone call," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. "Someone from a catering company thinks I'm hosting a wedding at my beach house next weekend." Linda looked up from her papers, with the kind of expression that immediately told me this was not going to be the misunderstanding I was hoping for. "Oh, that," she said casually, waving her hand as if I had mentioned the weather. "Emma needed a proper venue for her wedding, and since you have all that space just sitting there empty, we thought it would be perfect." The words hit me like a physical blow. "We thought," I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. "Who is we? And since when do you get to make decisions about my property?" Emma appeared from the living room, her face glowing with excitement that quickly faded when she saw my expression. At 25, my younger sister had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She was prettier than she was smart, more charming than she was hardworking, and had developed a sense of entitlement that our parents had never bothered to correct. "Calhoun, you're going to love this," she said, rushing over with a folder full of papers. "Jake and I are getting married, and your beach house is going to be absolutely perfect for the ceremony. I have been telling everyone about how beautiful it is, and Jake's family is so excited to see it." "Wait, slow down," I said, holding up my hands. "When did you even see my beach house? You have never been there." Emma's cheeks flushed slightly. "Well, I have seen all your photos on social media, and I know exactly what it looks like. Plus, I have been showing everyone the pictures, and they think it is the most romantic setting imaginable." The room started to spin slightly as the implications began to sink in. "Emma, what pictures are you showing people?" She pulled out her phone and showed me her Instagram account. There, posted as if they were her own, were dozens of photos from my beach house, pictures I had taken of the sunset from my deck, the view from my living room windows, the private beach access that had cost me an additional $50,000 to secure. Each photo was captioned with phrases like, "My peaceful retreat," and "Grateful for this beautiful home." "Emma," I said slowly, "these are my photos from my Instagram account." "I know, but I needed people to see what the venue looked like," she said defensively. "And technically, it is kind of a family property, right? I mean, we are family." My father Paul chose that moment to walk into the kitchen. At 58, he was a man who had worked hard his entire life, but had never quite achieved the financial success he had always dreamed of. He looked at me with the expression he had worn since I had started making more money than him, a combination of pride and resentment that made every family gathering uncomfortable. "There is my successful son," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I hear you are finally going to do something nice for your sister." "Dad, I just found out about this 2 minutes ago," I said, trying to maintain some semblance of calm. Nobody asked me if this was okay. Paul's expression hardened. Asked you? Son, family does not ask family for help. Family helps family. That is how it has always been, and that is how it should be. This is not help, Dad. This is using my property without my permission for something that probably costs tens of thousands of dollars to do properly. Oh, do not be so dramatic, Linda interjected. It is one little wedding. Emma has been planning this for months, and everyone is so excited. You should be happy to contribute to your sister's special day. Months, I repeated. You have been planning this for months without telling me. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Ever since Jake proposed, I knew immediately that your beach house would be the perfect location. It is going to be absolutely magical. I looked around the room at my family, all of whom seemed completely oblivious to the magnitude of what they had done. They had made major decisions about my property, committed me to hosting an event I knew nothing about, and apparently been planning it for 3 months without a single word to me. Emma, do you have any idea what it costs to host a wedding for 140 people? Do you know what kind of permits you need? What about insurance, catering, logistics, parking, bathroom facilities? Oh, we have it all figured out, she said brightly. Jake's mom has been helping with all the planning. She is amazing at organizing events. The mention of Jake's mother sent a new wave of panic through me. Jake's mom? How involved is Jake's family in this? Very involved, Emma said proudly. They are so grateful that we have such a beautiful venue. Mrs. Henderson has been working on the details for weeks. I felt like I was drowning. Not only had my family committed my property without my consent, but they had apparently brought another entire family into the situation. People I had never met were now planning an event at my house, probably making arrangements that would cost me thousands of dollars and potentially expose me to massive liability. I need to get to my beach house, I said, heading toward the door. I need to see what kind of situation you have created. Calhoun, do not overreact, Paul called after me. It is just one weekend. You can afford to be generous for once in your life. I stopped at the door and turned back to face him. Generous? Dad, generosity is when you choose to give something. This is theft. As I drove away, I could see Emma in the rearview mirror, standing in the driveway looking hurt and confused. But my concern for her feelings was rapidly being overshadowed by my growing fear of what I was going to find when I reached my beach house. The 3-hour drive to Malibu gave me plenty of time to work myself into a state of complete panic. I called my business partner Derek twice, trying to explain the situation. But even saying it out loud made it sound unbelievable. Your family planned a wedding at your house without telling you. He kept repeating, as if hearing it again might make it make sense. When I finally turned into my driveway, my worst fears were immediately confirmed. There were 2 cars I had never seen before, parked in my spot, and I could hear voices coming from my back deck. I sat in my truck for a moment, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to discover. I walked around to the back of the house and found 4 people sitting at my outdoor dining table, which was covered with wedding planning materials. They looked up as I approached, and a woman in her 50s immediately stood up with a warm smile. You must be Calhoun, she said, walking over to give me a hug as if we were old friends. I am Janet Henderson, Jake's mother. Emma has told us so much about you, and we are so grateful that you are letting us use your beautiful home for the wedding. I stood there awkwardly as this stranger embraced me, looking over her shoulder at the other people at my table. There was an older man who I assumed was Jake's father, a woman about Emma's age who must be Jake's sister, and a teenage boy who was wearing what appeared to be one of my own t-shirts. Mrs. Henderson, I said carefully, I think there might be some confusion about this wedding situation. Oh, call me Janet, she said brightly. We are going to be practically family after Saturday. Emma told us how excited you are to host the ceremony. This house is even more beautiful than the pictures she showed us. What pictures did she show you? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Janet pulled out her phone and started scrolling through photos. All of these beautiful shots of the house and the beach. Emma said she took them during family visits. She has such a good eye for photography. I looked at the phone screen and confirmed what I had feared. These were the same photos from my Instagram account that Emma had stolen and passed off as her own. But seeing them on a stranger's phone, hearing them described as evidence of Emma's visits to my house, made the deception feel even worse. Mrs. Henderson, I hate to tell you this, but Emma has never actually been to this house before. Janet looked confused. That cannot be right. She knows every detail of the layout. She even drew us a map of where everything is located. Jake's father, who had been quietly listening, stood up and extended his hand. Bob Henderson, he said. Emma gave us copies of the house keys so we could come up and do some planning visits. I hope that is okay. We did not want to bother you at work. I stared at him. Emma gave you copies of my house keys, just for the wedding planning, Bob said quickly. We have been very respectful. We only came up on weekends, and we always cleaned up after ourselves. The teenage boy, who had been suspiciously quiet, finally spoke up. This house is awesome, dude. The Wi-Fi is super fast, and the kitchen has everything you need. We made pancakes yesterday morning. I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality. Not only had Emma given strangers keys to my house, but they had been staying here, eating my food, using my utilities, and treating my private space like a vacation rental. How many times have you been here? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. This is our 4th weekend, Janet said proudly. We have gotten so much done. Wait until you see what we have accomplished. She led me into the house, and I followed with a growing sense of horror. The first thing I noticed was that my living room furniture had been rearranged. My expensive leather couch had been moved against the wall, and my coffee table was nowhere to be seen. In the center of the room were folding chairs arranged in rows, facing toward my fireplace. We set up a seating chart, Janet explained. The ceremony will be right here in the living room, with the reception out on the deck. Emma thought it would be more intimate than having everything outside. I followed her into my kitchen, which had been transformed into what looked like a command center for wedding planning. My granite countertops were covered with vendor contact lists, seating charts, menu planning guides, and fabric samples. My refrigerator was covered with sticky notes and what appeared to be a timeline for the wedding day activities. But the biggest shock came when Janet led me into my home office. My desk had been cleared of all my business materials and was now covered with wedding invitations, thank you cards, and what looked like a guest list spreadsheet. My computer monitor was displaying a wedding planning website, and there were charts taped to my walls showing table arrangements and vendor schedules. Emma set up our planning headquarters in here, Janet said proudly. She said you do not use this room very often, so it was perfect for our needs. I walked over to my desk and picked up one of the wedding invitations. It was beautifully designed, with a photo of my beach house on the front and elegant script announcing the marriage of Emma and Jake Henderson. But what made my blood run cold was the text inside. It read, "The pleasure of your company is requested at the marriage celebration of Emma Marie Johnson and Jacob Robert Henderson. The ceremony and reception will be graciously hosted by Calhoun Johnson at his private beach estate in Malibu, California." Janet, I said slowly, this invitation says that I am hosting this wedding. Well, you are not you? She replied, looking confused. Emma said you were excited to be the host. I kept reading the invitation, and my panic continued to grow. At the bottom, it listed my address, my phone number, and instructions for guests to RSVP to my business address. It even mentioned a gift registry and suggested that guests who wished to contribute to the celebration fund could send checks made out to me personally. How many of these invitations were sent out? I asked. 140, Janet said proudly. We wanted to make sure everyone Emma and Jake care about could be there to celebrate. I looked around my office, taking in the full extent of what had been done to my private space. These people had been living in my house, using my belongings, and planning an elaborate event that I was apparently expected to host and pay for. And they had been doing it for weeks without my knowledge or consent. The teenage boy appeared in the doorway of my office, still wearing my vintage concert t-shirt. Hey, is it cool if I use the shower in the master bedroom? I got sandy when we were setting up the arch on the beach this morning. Trevor, that is not your room, Janet said quickly. Use the guest bathroom. But the damage was done. This kid had been sleeping in my bed, using my shower, and wearing my clothes. I walked quickly to my bedroom and found evidence of multiple people having stayed there. The bed was unmade. There were unfamiliar toiletries in my bathroom, and my closet had been gone through. Some of my clothes were missing, probably being worn by Jake's family members who had been treating my house like their personal vacation home. I returned to the living room where the Henderson family was waiting for me, all of them looking expectant and happy. They clearly thought I was going to be pleased with all the progress they had made on the wedding planning. They had no idea that they had just shown me the most elaborate violation of my privacy and property that I could have imagined. Janet, I said carefully, I think we need to have a serious conversation about this wedding situation. The conversation with the Henderson family was one of the most awkward experiences of my life. Janet kept insisting that Emma had told them I was thrilled to host the wedding, while Bob showed me receipts for deposits they had already paid for various services. They had spent over $15,000 of their own money on vendors and rentals, all based on Emma's assurance that I was eager to provide the venue. When I finally convinced them that there had been a massive miscommunication, Janet started crying. She pulled out her phone and called Emma, putting the call on speaker so we could all hear the conversation. Emma, honey, there seems to be some confusion, Janet said. Calhoun says he did not know about the wedding plans. There was a long pause before Emma's voice came through the phone, sounding defensive and panicked. That is impossible. I talked to him about it months ago. He said the house was available. I grabbed the phone. Emma, you have never talked to me about any wedding. The first I heard about this was when a caterer called me this morning. Well, I was going to talk to you about it, Emma said weakly. I just knew you would say yes because you love me. The call ended with Emma hanging up on us, and I was left dealing with a family who had invested thousands of dollars and weeks of planning into an event that was now in jeopardy. I felt terrible for them, but I also felt violated and furious about what my sister had done. After the Hendersons left, promising to call off all the vendors and try to get refunds, I drove back to town to my landscaping business office. I needed to think clearly about this situation, and being in my violated beach house was not helping my mental state. When I arrived at the office, my secretary Monica looked up from her desk with a relieved expression. Thank goodness you are here, she said. I have been getting the strangest deliveries and phone calls all week, and I did not know what to do about them. What kind of deliveries? I asked, though I was starting to suspect I already knew. Monica led me to our storage room, which I rarely used. When she opened the door, I was stunned to see it filled with wrapped wedding gifts. There were at least 30 boxes of various sizes, all addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Jake Henderson, care of Calhoun Johnson at my business address. People have been dropping these off all week, Monica explained. Some were delivered by UPS, some by FedEx, and some were brought by the guests personally. I did not know what to do with them, so I just started stacking them in here. I picked up one of the cards attached to a large box. It was from someone named Margaret Williams, and it read, Dear Emma and Jake, congratulations on your special day. Thank you to Calhoun for hosting such a beautiful celebration. This crystal set belonged to my grandmother, and I hope it brings you as much joy as it brought our family. Another card was even worse. It was from Jake's elderly grandmother, and attached to it was an envelope that clearly contained a check. The note read, Dear Calhoun, thank you for opening your beautiful home to our family. Please accept this small contribution to help cover the expenses of hosting such a generous celebration for Emma and Jake. You are a wonderful brother. I opened the envelope and nearly fell over. There was a check for $5,000 made out to me personally, with wedding expenses written in the memo line. This poor woman thought I was paying for the entire wedding and had sent me money to help cover the costs. Monica showed me a filing system she had created for RSVP responses that had been coming to my business address. There were over 60 responses so far, and reading through them painted a picture of the elaborate celebration that guests were expecting. People were planning to travel from as far away as New York and Texas for this wedding. Some had booked hotel rooms for the entire weekend, expecting a multi-day celebration with multiple events. One response was particularly detailed. It was from Jake's college roommate, who wrote, Cannot wait to party at the infamous Malibu beach house we have heard so much about. Jake has been bragging about Emma's family's estate for months. Thanks for the generous hospitality, Calhoun. We are bringing our surfboards and planning to make a vacation out of it. Another response mentioned that the guests were expecting welcome bags, arranged transportation from the airport, and recommendations for local activities during their weekend stay. Several people had written that they were excited to finally meet the generous brother who owns the beach house, and thanked me in advance for the weekend of a lifetime. As I read through more responses, I began to understand the full scope of what Emma had promised people. This was not just a simple wedding ceremony. Guests were expecting a luxury weekend experience with accommodations, meals, entertainment, and activities, all provided by me as the gracious host. The most shocking discovery came when Monica showed me a folder of vendor contracts that had been faxed to my business over the past few weeks. Emma had been signing contracts in my name, committing me to thousands of dollars in services. There was a catering contract for $28,000, a floral arrangement contract for $8,000, a photography package for $6,000, and a rental equipment contract for $12,000. All of these contracts listed me as the responsible party for payment, and they all had Emma's signature next to a line that read, "Authorized Representative of Property Owner." She had been signing my name and committing me to over $50,000 in expenses without my knowledge or consent. Monica handed me one final document that made my stomach drop completely. It was a liability insurance waiver that Emma had signed in my name, acknowledging that my property insurance might not cover wedding events and that I was assuming full financial responsibility for any accidents or damages that occurred during the celebration. "Monica," I said slowly, "how long have these documents been coming in?" "About 6 weeks," she replied. "I tried to ask you about them a few times, but you were always busy with the Morrison project, so I just filed them thinking you would deal with them when you had time." I realized that while I had been focused on the biggest landscaping contract of my career, my sister had been systematically destroying my financial security and reputation. She had committed me to hosting an event that would cost more money than I made in 6 months, all while promising guests an experience that I had no way of delivering. The situation was even worse than I had initially thought. This was not just a case of family members being presumptuous about using my property. This was fraud. Emma had forged my signature, committed me to contracts I never agreed to, and created legal and financial obligations that could bankrupt me if I did not handle the situation carefully. I spent the rest of the afternoon calling vendors to try to understand exactly what Emma had committed me to. Most of them were sympathetic when I explained that the contracts had been signed without my authorization, but several had already purchased supplies and materials specifically for the event. Canceling at this point would still cost me thousands of dollars in cancellation fees and restocking charges. By the time I finished making calls, I had a clear picture of the financial nightmare Emma had created. Even if I canceled everything immediately, I would still be on the hook for over $12,000 in fees and deposits. If I let the wedding proceed as planned, it would cost me more than $60,000 and expose me to unlimited liability for anything that went wrong during the event. But the worst part was realizing how many innocent people were going to be hurt by Emma's deception. The Henderson family had spent their savings on a wedding that could not happen as planned. 60 families had made travel plans and arrangements to attend an event that I could not host. And Emma's reputation and relationship with Jake were about to be destroyed when the truth came out. As I sat in my office that evening, surrounded by evidence of my sister's betrayal, I realized that I needed to come up with a plan that would protect myself while minimizing the damage to everyone else involved. But I also knew that Emma needed to face consequences for what she had done. She could not be allowed to destroy people's lives and finances just because she wanted a fairy tale wedding that she could not afford. I drove straight from my office to my parents' house, armed with copies of all the contracts, vendor agreements, and RSVP responses that Emma had generated without my knowledge. I was furious, but I was also determined to handle this confrontation in a way that would force my family to understand the full scope of what Emma had done. When I walked into the house, I found the entire family gathered in the living room. Emma was sitting on the couch next to Jake, a young man I was meeting for the first time who looked like he wanted to disappear into the furniture. My parents were sitting across from them, and everyone looked up with expressions ranging from defiant to terrified when I entered the room. "We need to talk," I said, setting my folder of documents on the coffee table. "All of us. Right now, Calhoun." "Before you say anything," Emma began, "I want you to know that I never meant for this to get so complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "Emma, you committed fraud. You signed contracts in my name, gave out keys to my house, and promised people an event that would cost me over $60,000 to execute properly." Jake spoke up for the first time. $60,000? "Emma, you said this would just be a simple ceremony with maybe some catering." I opened my folder and spread the contracts across the coffee table. "Jake, your fiancé signed contracts committing me to $28,000 in catering, $8,000 in flowers, $6,000 in photography, $12,000 in equipment rentals, And that does not even include the cost of accommodating guests who are expecting to stay at my house for the weekend. Paul stood up and walked over to examine the contracts. His face grew pale as he read through them. Emma, what were you thinking? These are legal documents. I was thinking that my brother would want to help me have a beautiful wedding, Emma said, her voice rising. I was thinking that family is supposed to support each other. Support is offering to help, I said. This is theft and fraud. You have been living in my house, giving tours to strangers, signing my name to contracts, and promising people an experience that I never agreed to provide. Linda finally spoke up, her voice defensive. Calhoun, you have to understand that Emma has been dreaming about this wedding since she was a little girl. She just got carried away with the planning. Got carried away. I pulled out the liability waiver Emma had signed in my name. Mom, she signed a document making me personally responsible for any accidents that happened during this event. If someone gets hurt at this wedding, I could be sued for everything I own. Jake was reading through the vendor contracts, his expression becoming more horrified with each document. Emma, this catering contract says there will be a raw bar with oysters and lobster. You told me we were having a barbecue. I wanted it to be special. Emma said desperately. I wanted our wedding to be something people would remember. They will remember it all right, I said. They will remember it as the wedding that bankrupted your brother and destroyed your family. Paul was studying the RSVP responses, shaking his head. Emma, these people are expecting accommodations, transportation, welcome bags, and entertainment for the entire weekend. Where did you think the money for all this was going to come from? I thought Calhoun would pay for it. Emma said quietly. He has money now, and I am his only sister. I thought he would want to do this for me. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed what Emma had just admitted. She had planned this entire elaborate deception based on the assumption that I would pay for whatever she wanted because I had been successful in my business. Emma, I said slowly, you thought I would pay $60,000 for a wedding that I was not invited to plan, at my house that you have never seen, for people I have never met. When you put it like that, it sounds bad, Emma said, starting to cry. But I love you. And I thought you loved me too. Jake was staring at his fiancée like he was seeing her for the first time. Emma, you told me your brother was excited about hosting our wedding. You said he offered his house and wanted to pay for everything as a wedding gift. I knew he would be excited once he saw how beautiful it could be, Emma said defensively. And he can afford it. His business is doing really well. That is not the point, Jake said, his voice rising. You lied to me, you lied to my family, and you committed fraud in your brother's name. How am I supposed to trust you after this? Paul was still reading through the documents, and his face was getting more serious with each page. Emma, this is not just about the money. You put your brother at legal risk. Some of these contracts have penalty clauses that could cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars if something goes wrong. I did not read all the fine print, Emma said weakly. I just wanted to make sure everything would be perfect. You did not read the contracts before you signed my name to them, I asked, my voice incredulous. Emma, you could have destroyed my entire business with your negligence. Jake stood up and started pacing around the room. This explains so much. My parents kept asking me about details that I did not know anything about. They kept mentioning things that you had promised them that sounded too expensive for us to afford. I thought they were exaggerating. Jake's family spent $15,000 on deposits for vendors and hotels, I said. They thought they were contributing to a celebration that I was hosting. Now they are going to lose their money because of Emma's lies. At this point, Emma broke down completely. She was sobbing and apologizing, but her apologies were focused on getting caught rather than on the harm she had caused. I am sorry, she kept repeating. I just wanted a beautiful wedding. I did not think it would hurt anyone. But Paul was not finished reading through the documents, and what he found next made the situation even worse. He pulled out a bank statement that I had not seen before. Emma, what is this? I looked at the statement and felt my heart stop. It was from my parents' bank account, and it showed a withdrawal of $28,000 from a home equity loan. Dad, what is this about? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Paul looked devastated. Emma said you would reimburse us for the wedding expenses after the event was over. She needed money for deposits, and she said it would only be temporary. You took out a loan against your house? I asked, horrified. Emma said it was the only way to secure the vendors on short notice, Linda said quietly. She promised that you would pay us back within a week of the wedding. I looked at the bank statement more carefully and saw that the $28,000 had been withdrawn in several smaller amounts over the past month. My parents had been systematically borrowing against their home to pay for Emma's fantasy wedding, believing that I had agreed to cover all the costs. Mom, Dad, I never agreed to pay for anything, I said gently. Emma never talked to me about this wedding. I found out about it when a caterer called me this morning. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the full scope of the financial disaster Emma had created. Not only had she committed me to contracts I could not afford, but she had also convinced our parents to go into debt based on promises she could not keep. Jake was the first to speak. Emma, you told my grandmother that Calhoun was paying for everything. She sent him a check for $5,000 to help with expenses. She did what? Emma asked, looking confused. Your future grandmother-in-law sent me money because she felt bad that I was paying for your wedding, I said. She wrote a thank you note saying I was a wonderful brother for being so generous. Jake sat back down and put his head in his hands. Emma, my entire family thinks your brother is hosting this wedding as a gift to us. They have been bragging to their friends about how generous your family is. When this all comes out, they are going to be humiliated. Maybe we can still make it work, Emma said desperately. Maybe Calhoun can just pay for it this one time, and I will pay him back later. With what money? I asked. Emma, you work part-time at a clothing store. It would take you 10 years to pay back $60,000. I will get a better job, she said. I will do whatever it takes. Emma, Jake said quietly, I do not think I can marry someone who would do something like this. This is not just about the money. This is about honesty and trust. And I do not know if I can trust you anymore. The room erupted as Emma started crying harder and begging Jake not to leave her. Paul was calculating how much the home equity loan was going to cost them in monthly payments. Linda was crying and saying she did not understand how everything had gotten so complicated. But what hit me hardest was realizing that my sister had destroyed her own relationship and potentially bankrupted our parents, all for the sake of a wedding that she could have had for a fraction of the cost if she had just been honest from the beginning. As I sat there watching my family fall apart, I knew that I had to find a way to fix this situation that would protect everyone while still holding Emma accountable for what she had done. But I also knew that whatever solution I came up with, things would never be the same between us again. I left my parents' house that night feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Emma was still crying and begging me to make it all work out somehow, while Jake had stormed out saying he needed time to think about their relationship. My parents were left trying to figure out how they were going to make the monthly payments on a $28,000 loan they had taken out for a wedding that might not even happen. I spent the next 2 days thinking through every possible solution to this nightmare. I could cancel everything and try to minimize the financial damage, but that would still leave me owing thousands in cancellation fees, while devastating everyone who had made plans to attend. I could go ahead and host the wedding, but that would reward Emma's fraud and cost me more money than I could comfortably afford. But as I sat in my office Wednesday evening, going through the vendor contracts for the 100th time, my business partner Derek walked in with an idea that changed everything. What if we make this work for you instead of against you? He said, settling into the chair across from my desk. What do you mean? I asked. Derek had been my partner in the landscaping business for 3 years, and his background in event management had helped us land several high-end corporate contracts. He understood the wedding industry better than I did, and he could see angles that I was missing. Look at this objectively, he said, spreading out the vendor contracts. You have got contracts with some of the best wedding vendors in Southern California. The catering company does events for celebrities. The photographer has shot weddings for movie stars. The rental company provides equipment for red carpet events. Derek, I cannot afford to pay for all this. You do not have to, he said with a grin. My company has been trying to break into the luxury corporate event market for years. What if we book your beach house for a legitimate corporate retreat the same weekend as Emma's wedding? I stared at him. You want to double book my house? Hear me out. I have a client, Zenith Technologies, that has been looking for an exclusive venue for their quarterly executive retreat. They want somewhere private and impressive where they can hold confidential business meetings away from prying eyes. Your beach house would be perfect. Derek pulled out his phone and showed me the email chain he had been having with Zenith's event coordinator. They need a venue for the second weekend of this month. That is exactly when Emma scheduled her wedding. They are willing to pay premium rates for exclusivity and privacy. How much are they willing to pay? I asked. $75,000 for the weekend, plus they cover all catering, security, and setup costs. It would be a completely legitimate business transaction, with proper contracts and insurance. I felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. But what about Emma's wedding? There are still 60 families planning to attend. That is Emma's problem to solve, Derek said firmly. She created this mess by committing your property without permission. Now she gets to deal with the consequences. We spent the next hour working out the details of Derek's plan. Zenith Technologies needed the venue for a 2-day executive retreat with 25 participants. They required complete privacy, professional catering, high-end accommodations, and state-of-the-art technology for presentations and video conferences. The timing was perfect. Zenith needed to book the venue immediately due to a scheduling conflict with their original location. Derek's event management company would handle all the logistics, and I would receive payment that would more than cover all of Emma's fraudulent contracts, while generating a significant profit for my business. The best part, Derek explained, is that this is completely above board. You will have legal contracts, proper insurance, and professional event management. If Emma's wedding vendors show up, you will have every right to turn them away because your property is legally booked for a private corporate event. I was starting to see the genius of Derek's plan. Not only would it solve my financial problems, but it would also force Emma to face the consequences of her actions in the most dramatic way possible. Instead of being rewarded for her fraud with a fairy tale wedding, she would have to explain to 60 families why they had traveled across the country for an event that could not happen. When would Zenith need to confirm the booking? I asked. Tomorrow, Derek said. Their legal team wants to review the contracts overnight, but they are ready to wire a deposit as soon as everything is signed. I made the decision that would change everything. Do it. Book the retreat. Derek spent Thursday morning finalizing the contracts with Zenith Technologies. By noon, I had received a wire transfer for $37,500 as a deposit, with the remaining balance due upon completion of the event. The contract included specific clauses about privacy and exclusivity, with significant penalty fees for any disruptions to the retreat. I also arranged for professional security services to be present during the corporate event. Zenith's executives would be discussing confidential business strategies and financial projections that required complete privacy. Any unauthorized persons attempting to access the property would be removed immediately and potentially charged with trespassing. The corporate retreat would begin Friday afternoon with executive arrivals and setup, followed by 2 full days of meetings, presentations, and team-building activities. The catering would be provided by the same company that Emma had contracted with, but now they would be serving a legitimate corporate event instead of a fraudulent wedding. I spent Thursday evening reviewing every detail of the corporate event to make sure there would be no possibility of Emma or her wedding party gaining access to the property. The security team would have a list of authorized personnel, and anyone not on the list would be turned away at the gate. But I made one additional decision that would make the situation even more dramatic. I decided not to tell my family about the corporate retreat until Saturday morning. Emma and the wedding vendors would arrive, expecting to set up for a ceremony, only to discover that the property was already occupied by a legitimate business event, with legal contracts and security protection. Friday night, I lay awake thinking about what was going to happen the next day. In less than 12 hours, Emma's fantasy wedding would collide head-on with the reality of what she had done. The Henderson family would discover the full extent of her deception. The wedding vendors would learn that their contracts had been fraudulently signed, and 60 families would realize that they had been lied to about an event that never had any chance of happening. But I also knew that this was the only way to protect myself and hold Emma accountable for her actions. She had committed fraud, violated my property, and put my family in financial jeopardy. If I let her get away with it by hosting the wedding anyway, she would never learn that actions have consequences. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread about the confrontation that was coming. But I also felt something I had not experienced in days, a sense of control over my own life and property. Saturday morning was going to be very interesting. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect California weather that makes Malibu famous. The sun was shining. There was not a cloud in the sky, and a gentle breeze was coming off the Pacific Ocean. It would have been a perfect day for a wedding, if there had actually been a wedding planned. I arrived at my beach house at 5:30 in the morning to meet the Zenith Technologies advance team. By 6 o'clock, corporate security personnel were stationed at the entrance to my driveway, and professional event staff were beginning to transform my property into a high-end executive retreat. The setup was impressive and efficient. Within 2 hours, my living room had been converted into a presentation theater with professional audio-visual equipment and leather conference chairs. My deck was being arranged with elegant outdoor furniture and a catering station that would serve gourmet meals throughout the weekend. The entire property was being prepared for an exclusive corporate event that represented exactly the kind of business opportunity I had been working toward for years. At 8:15, I saw the first wedding vendor truck approaching my driveway. I watched from my kitchen window as a catering van tried to enter the property, only to be stopped by corporate security. I could see the confusion on the driver's face as the security guard checked his clipboard and shook his head. The driver got out of his truck and walked over to the security station, waving what appeared to be a work order. The security guard politely but firmly explained that the property was reserved for a private corporate event, and no wedding vendors were authorized to enter. Within minutes, more wedding vendor trucks began arriving. A florist van, a rental equipment trailer, and a photographer's car all lined up behind the catering truck, their drivers increasingly frustrated as security turned each of them away. I walked outside to observe the situation, and the head of security approached me. "Mr. Johnson, we have several wedding vendors claiming they have contracts to provide services at your property today. Should I continue to deny them access?" "Absolutely," I said. "This property is exclusively reserved for the Zenith Technologies retreat. No wedding vendors are authorized to be here." At 8:45, Emma's car pulled up behind the line of vendor trucks. I watched as she got out, already wearing her wedding dress, and marched toward the security checkpoint with determination and fury written across her face. The security guard stopped her at the gate, and I could hear her voice rising as she demanded to be allowed onto her family's property. When the guard remained firm, Emma started screaming that this was her wedding day, and that there had been some kind of mistake. Jake arrived a few minutes later, followed by both sets of parents. The Henderson family looked confused and embarrassed, as they were denied entry to a property where they thought they were hosting their son's wedding. My parents looked mortified as they realized that something had gone very wrong with Emma's plans. I decided it was time to address the situation directly. I walked down to the security checkpoint where Emma was becoming increasingly hysterical. "Emma," I said calmly, "you need to leave. This property is reserved for a legitimate business event." "Calhoun, what are you talking about?" she screamed. "This is my wedding day. You cannot do this to me." "I did not do anything to you," I replied. "You did this to yourself when you committed fraud and signed contracts in my name without permission." Janet Henderson stepped forward, her face pale with realization. "Emma, what is he talking about? You told us Calhoun was hosting the wedding." "He is," Emma said desperately. "This is all just a misunderstanding. Calhoun, tell them this is all a mistake." "The only mistake was trusting you," I said. "Emma has been lying to everyone. She never had permission to use this property. She forged my signature on vendor contracts. She gave out keys to my house without authorization. This entire wedding was a fraud from beginning to end." Jake looked like he had been punched in the stomach. "Emma, is that true? Did you lie about having permission to use your brother's house?" "I knew he would say yes if I asked," Emma said, her voice cracking. "I just did not want to risk him saying no." "So you committed fraud instead," Jake said quietly. "You put my family's money at risk and lied to everyone we care about." Bob Henderson was reading one of the vendor contracts, his face growing redder with each line. "Emma, this contract has your signature next to a line that says authorized representative. Did you sign your brother's name to legal documents?" Emma's silence was answer enough. The wedding vendors were still lined up in their trucks, unable to access the property and increasingly angry about the situation. Wedding guests had started to arrive and were parking along the street, confused about why they could not get to the ceremony location. The situation was about to get much worse. Emma, in her desperation and fury, made a decision that transformed her from a liar into a criminal. She ducked under the security rope and ran toward my house, screaming that this was her wedding day and no one was going to stop her. The security guards gave chase, but Emma had adrenaline and desperation on her side. She made it to my back deck, where the corporate catering staff was setting up equipment for the executive retreat. In her white wedding dress and veil, Emma looked like a vengeful ghost as she started grabbing expensive audiovisual equipment and throwing it toward the ocean. "If I cannot have my wedding here, then nobody can have anything here," she screamed, picking up a projection screen and hurling it off the deck. The catering staff scattered as Emma continued her rampage, destroying thousands of dollars worth of rental equipment that belonged to the corporate event. She overturned tables, threw chairs, and smashed decorative arrangements that had been carefully arranged for the business retreat. Security finally caught up with her as she was attempting to destroy a professional sound system that cost more than most people's cars. As they restrained her, Emma continued screaming about her ruined wedding and demanding that everyone leave her family's property. The Zenith Technologies executives had started arriving for their retreat and were witnessing the entire meltdown. I was mortified that my sister's behavior was disrupting what should have been a professional business event. But the security team handled the situation with impressive professionalism. The police arrived within 10 minutes of being called. Emma was arrested for criminal destruction of property, trespassing, and disturbing the peace. As they led her away in handcuffs, still wearing her wedding dress, wedding guests who had been waiting in their cars finally understood that there was not going to be a ceremony. Jake stood watching as his fiancée was loaded into a police car, and I could see in his face that their relationship was over. The Henderson family was devastated, not just by the financial loss, but by the public humiliation of discovering that their son's wedding had been a complete fraud. My parents were crying as they realized the full extent of what Emma had done and the consequences she was now facing. But there was also relief in their faces, as if they finally understood that Emma's behavior was not something they could or should enable anymore. The wedding vendors eventually left after I provided them with police report numbers and contact information for Emma's legal counsel. Most of them were understanding once they learned that the contracts had been signed without my authorization. A few threatened legal action, but Derek assured me that we had solid documentation proving that Emma had committed fraud. The Zenith Technologies retreat proceeded as planned, despite the dramatic interruption. The executives were actually impressed with how professionally the security situation had been handled, and they booked my property for their next quarterly meeting before the weekend was over. As the sun set on what should have been Emma's wedding day, I stood on my deck watching the corporate executives enjoy their catered dinner while discussing business strategies and market projections. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated event that my property was designed to host, and it felt good to see it being used for its intended purpose, rather than as a prop in Emma's fantasy. But I also felt sad about what had happened to my family. Emma was spending her wedding night in jail, facing serious criminal charges that could affect her for the rest of her life. My parents were dealing with a $28,000 loan they could barely afford, and Jake's family had lost thousands of dollars and suffered public humiliation because of my sister's deception. The situation was resolved, but the cost had been enormous for everyone involved. As I prepared for bed that night, I knew that the hardest part was still ahead, helping my family heal from the damage that Emma's choices had caused. Emma spent Saturday night and Sunday in the county jail, which gave everyone time to process what had happened and decide how to move forward. The reality of facing criminal charges, combined with the public humiliation of being arrested on her wedding day, seemed to shock Emma into understanding the severity of what she had done. Jake visited her in jail on Sunday morning, but not for the reason she was hoping. He returned her engagement ring and told her that their relationship was over. The Henderson family had lost over $15,000 in deposits and travel expenses, and Jake could not forgive Emma for the lies and financial fraud that had put his family at risk. "I thought I knew you," Jake told her through the jail visitor window. "But the person who would do what you did is not someone I can trust with my future." My parents used their Sunday to meet with their financial advisor and figure out how to handle the home equity loan they had taken out for the wedding expenses. The monthly payments were going to strain their retirement budget significantly, and they were facing the reality that Emma's poor decisions had put their financial security in jeopardy. I spent Sunday working with Derek and the Zenith Technologies team to complete the corporate retreat. Despite the dramatic interruption on Saturday morning, the business event was a huge success. The executives were impressed with the venue, the professionalism of our event management, and the way we had handled the security situation. By Sunday afternoon, they had booked my property for their next 3 quarterly meetings and recommended my services to 2 other major corporations. The corporate retreat generated $75,000 in revenue, which more than covered all of Emma's fraudulent contracts and left me with a significant profit. More importantly, It established my beach house as a legitimate high-end corporate venue and opened up an entirely new revenue stream for my business. Emma was released on Monday morning after posting bail with money borrowed from a friend. She came directly to my office, looking exhausted and defeated. For the first time since this entire situation began, she seemed to understand the full scope of what she had done. "Calhoun, I am so sorry," she said, and for the first time, her apology sounded genuine rather than manipulative. "I know what I did was wrong, and I know I hurt a lot of people." "Emma, you did not just hurt people," I said. "You committed crimes. You have criminal charges pending, and you could face jail time." "I know," she said quietly. "My lawyer explained everything to me. But I want you to know that I never meant for it to get this out of hand. I just wanted a beautiful wedding, and I thought everything would work out somehow." "That is the problem," I said. "You thought someone else would pay the price for your dreams. You put Mom and Dad in debt. You cost Jake's family their savings. And you could have destroyed my business and reputation." Emma broke down crying. But this time, her tears seemed to come from genuine remorse rather than self-pity. "What can I do to fix this?" she asked. "You can start by taking responsibility," I said. "You need to pay back everyone you cost money, and you need to face whatever legal consequences come from your actions." Over the next few months, Emma worked with her lawyer to negotiate plea deals for the criminal charges. She agreed to pay restitution for the property damage she had caused during her arrest, perform community service, and attend counseling to address the entitlement and dishonesty issues that had led to her criminal behavior. She also got a full-time job and began making monthly payments to reimburse Jake's family for their lost deposits and travel expenses. It would take her several years to pay back everything she owed, but she was committed to taking responsibility for the financial harm she had caused. My parents and I worked together to restructure their home equity loan into a payment plan that would not destroy their retirement security. I contributed some of the profits from the corporate retreat to help reduce their debt burden, but I also made it clear that this was contingent on them attending family counseling to address the enabling behaviors that had allowed Emma's entitlement to develop unchecked. The family counseling sessions were difficult but productive. My parents began to understand how their different treatment of Emma and me had created resentment and dysfunction within our family. They learned to set boundaries and hold Emma accountable for her choices rather than automatically rescuing her from the consequences of her actions. Emma's therapy helped her recognize the pattern of entitlement and dishonesty that had led to the wedding fraud. She began to understand that her sense of being owed things by others had prevented her from developing the work ethic and integrity needed to build a genuine life for herself. 6 months after the wedding disaster, Jake married someone else in a simple ceremony at his church. The Henderson family had learned to be cautious about elaborate promises and expensive weddings, and they appreciated the honesty and simplicity of Jake's new relationship. Emma attended Jake's wedding, not as a guest, but as part of her community service requirement. She was working with a non-profit organization that helped low-income families plan affordable weddings, and she was learning that meaningful celebrations come from love and commitment rather than expensive venues and luxury services. The work was teaching her valuable lessons about what really mattered in relationships and helping her develop genuine empathy for people who were struggling financially. For the first time in her life, Emma was contributing to something larger than herself, rather than expecting others to provide for her desires. My beach house business flourished as word spread about the successful corporate retreat. Within a year, I was hosting executive events, corporate training programs, and high-end business conferences on a regular basis. The revenue allowed me to expand my landscaping business and invest in additional properties for the growing corporate events market. But more importantly, the experience taught me valuable lessons about family relationships and personal boundaries. I learned that true generosity requires choice and consent, not obligation and manipulation. I discovered that protecting my boundaries was not selfish but necessary for maintaining healthy relationships with people who respected what I had worked to achieve. The most surprising outcome was that my relationship with my family actually improved after the wedding crisis. Once we established clear boundaries and honest communication, we were able to enjoy each other's company without the undercurrent of resentment and entitlement that had poisoned our interactions before. Emma and I gradually rebuilt our relationship based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. She learned to appreciate what I had accomplished through hard work and smart decisions, while I learned to support her genuine efforts to improve her life without enabling her poor choices. A year and a half after the wedding disaster, I hosted a proper family celebration at my beach house. But this time, it was planned with everyone's input and consent. Emma helped with the planning and contributed financially based on what she could afford. My parents attended as guests, rather than expecting to be served. Jake's replacement brought his new wife, and the Henderson family was invited as a gesture of reconciliation and goodwill. The celebration was simple, honest, and genuinely joyful. We grilled burgers on the deck, played volleyball on the beach, and watched the sunset without worrying about impressing anyone or creating social media content. It was everything that Emma's fraudulent wedding was not: authentic, affordable, and based on real relationships rather than fake presentations. As I watched my family enjoying themselves at my beach house, I reflected on how much we had all learned from the wedding crisis. Emma had learned that entitlement destroys relationships, while hard work builds genuine success. My parents had learned that enabling bad behavior helps no one and hurts everyone. And I had learned that defending my boundaries was not just about protecting myself, but about forcing the people I love to develop the character they need to be truly happy. The life lesson that emerged from this entire experience was profound and lasting. True generosity comes from choice, not obligation. When family members respect what you have worked for instead of feeling entitled to it, real love and support can flourish. Boundaries are not barriers to family relationships, but foundations for healthy ones. Protecting what you have built is not selfish when it forces others to develop their own strength and integrity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices so they can learn to make better ones. Emma's wedding day ended with her in handcuffs, but it began her journey toward becoming a person worthy of the love and respect she had always demanded but never earned. And that transformation was worth more than any wedding could ever be. The beach house still hosts celebrations, but now they are earned rather than stolen, planned rather than fraudulent, and based on genuine relationships rather than fantasy presentations. And that makes every sunset from my deck more beautiful than any photograph could ever capture. Looking back on this experience, I realized that the most important thing I protected was not my property or my money, but my family's opportunity to grow into people capable of real love and genuine success. That protection required saying no to a wedding, but it made possible a lifetime of authentic relationships. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses, even when they are someone you love. Especially when they are someone you love. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members to protect what you had worked for? How do you balance generosity with the need to protect yourself from people who feel entitled to what you have built? I would love to hear about your experiences with family boundaries and whether you think I handled this situation correctly. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like this video if you found the story meaningful. Subscribe for more stories about family drama and personal boundaries, and share this with anyone who might be dealing with similar family entitlement issues. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you navigate your own family challenges with wisdom and strength.